I'm Clearwater Estate Planning Attorney Carol Lawson. Today we are going to talk about the major differences between irrevocable and revocable trusts. A revocable trust is often referred to as a living trust. The first big difference is the fact that a revocable trust can be changed or modified or revoked or done away with completely at any time by the person or persons creating the trust. If you create a revocable trust, you're typically doing so to avoid probate. That's the main purpose of creating a revocable trust. You want to make sure that the assets that you own do not have to go through probate and the long, expensive court process before they pass on to your beneficiaries. If you create a revocable trust, you are the one who retains control. You can change what is in the trust at any time. You can change the wording of the trust itself. You can even totally do away with the trust if you decide you don't want to have it any longer. Whereas your irrevocable trust, once it is formed and it is signed, it is fully executed, it's notarized, and you fund the trust by moving an asset into the trust. Then it's like concrete. The irrevocable trust, once formed and funded, cannot be changed, altered, or amended, even if the person who created it wants to do so. So, this trust, once it is done, it's signed, and you have stuff in it, it's pretty much, in most cases, a done deal. So, the first big difference, whether you can make changes or not to the trust or move things out of the trust if you want to do so. The second thing, this sort of goes along with the ownership issue, is so who actually owns the property in the trust? So, even though with a revocable trust, the trust does technically become the title holder of the property in the trust, with a revocable trust, the person who is putting the property in the trust, which we call the grantor, this person creating the trust, they still maintain control over those assets. So because of that, because they can decide to take the assets out of the trust at any time and put them back in their name or move things in and out, they are, for legal purposes, still pretty much like the owner of the assets. They're going to still be able to maintain full control over that asset, the same as they did before when their name or names were the only owners of that asset. Whereas with an irrevocable trust, once you transfer the asset into the trust, it is no longer owned or controlled by you. It is owned by the trust itself. It comes outside of your ownership interest, your control. You no longer really have a say in what's going to happen with that asset. You can't just take it out of the trust at any time and call it your own again, or put it in your name, which goes along with the next difference, and that's the protection of the asset. Because if you think about it in this way, if you're maintaining complete control of an asset, like you are in a revocable trust, and you are in essence still the owner, then that type of trust, a revocable trust, is not going to be able to give you much asset protection because the asset's still effectively operating as your own. It's really not apart from you as it is in an irrevocable trust. So, if you transfer things to revocable trust, you're going to get a lot of protection regarding the avoidance of probate, and this in itself is beneficial. However, you are not going to have the added benefits of asset protection, whereas an irrevocable trust provides asset protection. The amount of asset protection it provides depends on the type of irrevocable trust that is set up and how it is set up, and how much as to how much asset protection. So the key thing about this, or the sort of takeaway point, is you're going to get asset protection with the irrevocable trust, but you're basically giving up ownership and giving up control of the asset in exchange for this asset protection. This asset no longer belongs to you. Legally, it is outside of your ownership. It is outside of your control because of that, and because of it being owned by this other entity, the trust. That's what gives it the asset protection, so that if somebody comes after you and tries to get a judgment against you, they can't attach or attack that particular asset in the irrevocable trust, because that asset is no longer owned by you. And the last difference I'm going to talk about for this video has to do with estate taxes. So currently the limit on what you can pass down as an individual is about $13 million. So a lot of us won't have to worry about federal estate taxation, but there are some people that do end up having to worry about federal estate taxation. Hopefully a lot of these people that reach the limit also know that that limit can come down notoriously. It has gone up or down throughout the years, but legislation can always bring down the limit so that it is much lower than the 13 million mark currently in force. People who do run up against this problem, who are going to have their estates have a tax burden because they're giving away, or the assets of the time of their assets at the time of their death are above this threshold of the $13 million, an irrevocable trust can effectively remove some of those assets from their estate and helpfully bring them down below the threshold to reduce or do away with the tax burden. A revocable trust cannot do that. When you have whatever you have in your revocable trust, whether the assets have transferred into the revocable trust and they will be subject to that limit, they will be subject to the $13 million that you are permitted to pass on to your beneficiaries through your trust. If you go over that limit with your assets in the revocable trust, then there are going to be tax consequences. Whereas if you move assets into an irrevocable trust, it effectively takes those assets out of your taxable estate and puts them in their own trust, so they are no longer subject to taxation. So this is also why a lot of people will use an irrevocable trust in order to get their taxable estate down below the threshold, so that they can either reduce or totally eliminate their tax burden. So I hope this helped to explain some of the differences between an irrevocable and a revocable trust. If you have any questions, please give us a call.